Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 67 of The Loud House, Be Stella My Heart. We begin this segment at Royal Woods Elementary School in the cafeteria during lunchtime. Lincoln, Clyde, Liam, Zach, and Rusty are all trying to figure out which food to trade with each other. Suddenly, Lincoln notices that the new girl from the segment White Hare is entering the cafeteria. It's at this moment when we, the viewers, get to see the new girl's face. In White Hare, we only saw the top of the new girl's head, and in White Hare, she was wearing an orange bow. She is not wearing the orange bow in this segment. Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio all agree that they think the new girl looks pretty, and Zach brings up that he heard the new girl speaks 3 languages. Lincoln then notices that the new girl is heading towards their direction, so Lincoln encourages his friends that they need to play it cool, or he says something along those lines anyway. The new girl approaches and greets Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio. She then inquires if any of them would be interested in trading for her carrots. The boys try to play it cool, but this just leads to awkward silence, and the new girl decides to head off elsewhere. After the new girl heads off elsewhere, Lincoln wonders out loud why the new girl approached them. Zach admits he doesn't have any guesses, but he thinks it's a good thing that they played it cool. The boys don't realize that their attempt to play it cool just led to awkward silence. The next scene takes us to gym class. We see that Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio have entered the snake formation, a defensive maneuver for dodgeball. Zach comments about how they have to keep a lookout for Girl Jordan because she has a history of blindsiding them. Suddenly, the new girl approaches Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio. She's impressed by their defensive maneuver and inquires if she can join the snake formation. Like in the cafeteria, the boys try to play it cool, but this just leads to awkward silence, and the new girl decides to head off elsewhere. Like in the cafeteria, Lincoln wonders why the new girl approached them, but then someone off-screen throws a dodgeball and hits Lincoln. Zach reveals that Girl Jordan was the one who threw the dodgeball, and Zach points out to Girl Jordan that Coach Bukowski didn't blow the whistle yet. The next scene takes us to a classroom. More specifically, Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio are in science class. Zach is holding a beaker full of chemicals, and Clyde comments that he should be the one to handle the Bunsen burner because of a previous incident that involved Rusty and aftershave. Once again, the new girl approaches Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio and inquires if she can be their lab partner. She brings up that she would otherwise have to be Agnes Johnson's lab partner. Once again, the boys try to play it cool, but this just leads to awkward silence. And this time, Zach accidentally drops the beaker he's holding, which causes an explosion. The new girl heads off elsewhere. So the next scene shows Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio are just outside of Nurse Patty's office because of the explosion that happened in science class. And Lincoln admits that he still doesn't know why the new girl approached them 3 different times over the course of the day. And it's at this point when Lincoln reveals the new girl's name. Like the title of the segment indicates, the new girl's name is Stella. Liam and Zach offer possible suggestions for why Stella might have approached them. And then Rusty suggests that maybe Stella has a crush on one of them. Lincoln, Clyde, Liam, and Zach consider the possibility that Rusty's guess could be accurate. And then they all wonder who Stella might have a crush on if Rusty's guess is accurate. Clyde then figures all they can do is just wait until Stella approaches them. Yes, Clyde thinks all they can do for now is just wait until the next time Stella approaches them. So the next scene takes us to a later point in time. We see Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio are all at their respective lockers, and they're making preparations for the next time when Stella approaches them. Eventually, Stella does approach Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio. She greets all of them, but then she talks to Lincoln specifically. Stella inquires Lincoln if he would be interested in joining her at the Bourbon Burger after school. Lincoln agrees to join Stella at the Bourbon Burger after school. After Stella heads off elsewhere, Clyde, Liam, and Zach congratulate Lincoln, and Rusty grumbles, "It's always Lincoln." Those are actually the words that Rusty uses. So the next scene cuts to the next day. At Royal Woods Elementary School, Lincoln is telling Clyde and the redheaded trio about the time he spent with Stella at the Bourbon Burger. Lincoln also brings up that Stella is very skilled at the claw machine game, and Stella and him both like curly fries over regular fries. Stella then enters the classroom, and she approaches Rusty. Stella inquires if Rusty would be interested in joining her at the flea market after school, and Rusty agrees to join Stella at the flea market after school. The other members of the inner circle are confused about this, Lincoln in particular. The next scene cuts to the next day. Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio are on the playground, and Rusty is telling the other members of the inner circle about the time he spent with Stella at the flea market. Rusty also mentions that Stella and him had acquired some ice cream, and they both prefer waffle cones. Stella then approaches the boys on the playground, and Stella talks to Liam in particular. Stella inquires Liam about if he would be interested in joining her at the mall after school. Stella says that she wants to try on some wigs at the wig store, and Liam agrees to join Stella at the wig store after school. And once again, the other members of the inner circle are confused about this, Rusty in particular. So the next scene leads to a voiceless montage scene. So yes, we get a montage, and no one actually talks during this montage, but we figure out what's going on because of expressions, gestures, and pictures and videos that are shown during the montage. So during this voiceless montage scene, it starts with the next day. Liam is showing the rest of the inner circle pictures of him and Stella trying wigs. Stella then approaches Zach and inquires if Zach would be interested in joining her in a game of laser tag after school, and Zach agrees to join Stella at this laser tag game after school. So continuing the voiceless montage scene, the next day shows Zach showing the rest of the inner circle a video of him and Stella playing laser tag. Stella then approaches Clyde and inquires if Clyde would be interested in joining her at the arcade to play a dancing game, and Clyde agrees to join Stella at the arcade. So continuing the voiceless montage scene, Clyde is showing the rest of the inner circle pictures of him and Stella playing this dancing game at the arcade. So this is when the voiceless montage scene ends. So after that scene ends, the scene changes to show Lincoln walking home from school. And Lincoln is talking to himself out loud, and Lincoln says that he's very confused about why Stella approached each member of the inner circle individually to spend one-on-one interactions with them. Lincoln doesn't know what to make of this situation. Eventually, Lincoln returns home, and he sees that his sisters are watching the Dreamboat. Lisa inquires if Lincoln will join them in watching the Dreamboat, but Lincoln says he's not in the mood right now. Lincoln is preparing to head upstairs, but before he reaches the second floor, he overhears someone on the Dreamboat talking. Now, this individual on the Dreamboat talking is named Kelly. Kelly says that she doesn't know who among a group of men she wants to be her first mate. Yes, Kelly says she doesn't know who among a group of men she wants to be her first mate. She thinks that they're all great individuals. Kelly then says that she'll have to wait until one of these individuals blow her out of the water. Those are the words that she uses. This leads to Lincoln suspecting that maybe Stella is in a similar situation that Kelly is in, so Lincoln decides to watch the dreamboat after all. The next scene takes us to the next day. Lincoln is wearing his date pants, and his hair is in a style different from its usual style. Lincoln then notices his friends, the other members of the inner circle, and there are differences about them. Clyde isn't wearing his glasses, Liam is using cologne, Zach has whitened his teeth, and Rusty is wearing a white suit. At first, the members of the inner circle try to insist that these differences are for some other reason, but eventually Rusty decides that there's no use putting up this charade. Rusty figures that they all watched the dreamboat last night, and Rusty figures that they all suspect that Stella hasn't decided who she wants to be her boyfriend, and they also suspect that Rusty suspects that they're all trying to blow Stella out of the water, to use the words that Kelly used on the dreamboat. And the rest of the inner circle agree that is the case. Zach admits that it's awkward, but Clyde thinks that they can all be gentlemen about it. Those are Clyde's words. At first, the inner circle agree to this, but the agreement doesn't last long. The next scene takes us to the cafeteria, and we see Stella is eating lunch alone. She's wearing a pair of headphones, so she doesn't hear what's about to happen. Now, what happens is Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio rush into the cafeteria, and they're all racing towards the table that Stella is sitting at. So while they're racing towards this table, Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio try all sorts of different tactics, maneuvers, actions, what have you, to slow the others down, if not outright stop them. Eventually, Lincoln is the one who reaches the table that Stella is sitting at. But when Lincoln reaches the table, that's when Stella finishes her lunch and she heads off elsewhere. Stella didn't see what happened, and because of the headphones she was wearing, she didn't hear what happened either. So Stella was completely unaware of what just happened in the cafeteria. So the next scene takes us to gym class. Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio are all angry at each other because of what happened in the cafeteria, and they all agree that they're not going to partake in the snake formation. Actually, when Coach Bukowski blows the whistle, Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio throw dodgeballs at each other. And eventually, it gets to the point where they stop using dodgeballs and they just fight each other directly. It gets to the point where Coach Bukowski actually has to break up the fight, and the other students can only watch, unsure of why Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio are fighting each other. The next scene shows Nurse Patty giving Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio ice packs just outside of her office. Nurse Patty wonders how this happened, and she is aware of the snake formation. Rusty says that they're no longer using the snake formation, and Nurse Patty comments about how that's unfortunate. She thought it was very heartwarming how Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio all looked out for each other. Nurse Patty then enters her office, but her words start to sink in for Lincoln. Lincoln then comments about how he doesn't understand how things got this far. Lincoln says he doesn't want to stop being friends with them over this, and Clyde and the redheaded trio agree with Lincoln. They don't want to stop being friends with each other over this. Rusty then accuses Stella for being the one that caused them to fight amongst each other. Rusty accuses Stella for pitting them against each other. Those are the words that Rusty uses. And the other members of the inner circle seem to agree with Rusty's accusations. So Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio decide that they need to talk to Stella. So they form the snake formation and they go to find Stella. So the next scene shows Stella is at her locker, and eventually Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio find Stella, and they approach her saying that they need to talk. Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio say that they're done with the mind games that they accuse Stella of playing on them. Stella doesn't know what they're talking about, but Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio think Stella is just plain innocent. That's along the lines of what they say. Eventually, Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio say that if Stella can't decide who she wants to be her boyfriend, then none of them are interested in being her boyfriend. And this leads to Stella starting to laugh. She apologizes for laughing, saying that this is because this is all a big misunderstanding. Stella says that she wasn't looking for a boyfriend. She was hoping to be friends with all of them in a platonic sense. Zach questions why didn't Stella just say that in the first place. Stella responds by bringing up the awkward silence that happened when she tried to talk to them collectively. Stella says that the interactions that they thought were dates were just her meeting up with them one-on-one in the hopes of getting to know them better to avoid the awkward silence that happened when she tried to talk to them collectively. Stella then decides that this was probably a bad idea and says that she thinks that the boys can't handle being friends with a girl, and decides that she's going to hang out with Agnes Johnson, who is her lab partner. After Stella leaves, Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio realize that it was wrong for them to blame Stella for them fighting amongst each other, and they all agree that it was really fun hanging out with Stella. Lincoln suggests that they should go and apologize to Stella. Lincoln figures in the best case scenario, Stella might be willing to give them another chance if they apologize. So the next scene takes us to the cafeteria. Stella is eating lunch by herself, and Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio approach her. Stella doesn't say anything to them, but she does look towards their direction. Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio apologize to Stella for jumping to conclusions and blaming her for them fighting amongst each other. They say that they're more than happy to be friends with her in a platonic sense. Stella, though, doesn't say anything and then turns away from them. Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio are sad about this response, but they say that they understand and say that they figure that they'll just see Stella around the school here or there in the future. So Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio sadly start to leave, but Stella then looks back at them, and she calls out to them to stop them from leaving. Stella inquires Lincoln about what's in the thermos he's holding. Lincoln says it's the tomato soup that his dad made. Stella then offers to give Lincoln the fruit salad she has if he will give her the tomato soup, and Lincoln accepts this deal, or this trade. Yes, Lincoln accepts this trade, and then Clyde, Liam, Zach, and Rusty all offer trades for different food that Stella has. Stella agrees to most of the trades. She doesn't agree to Zach's trade. And Clyde then suggests that they need to figure out how to arrange the snake formation now that there's a new member for the snake formation. Stella then pulls out some blueprints and suggests that they try a scorpion formation. Stella says that the scorpion formation is 22% more effective in her words. And Lincoln encourages Stella to elaborate on the scorpion formation. And that is how we end this segment. So this segment is the sequel to White Hare, because this segment marks the formal debut of the new girl who technically debuted in White Hare. And it's in this segment when we learn the new girl's name. The new girl's name is Stella. And although we only saw the top of her head in White Hare, Stella already has a slight redesign. She no longer has the orange bow that she wore in White Hare. And yes, I did bring this, besides bringing back Stella, a character who first came to Royal Woods in White Hare, this segment also marks a change in the status quo because Stella becomes the newest member of Lincoln's inner circle. And when the segment first premiered on TV, I remember some fans were worried that we wouldn't see Stella again after this segment because of how the show sometimes has characters that we never really hear from again, or they just appear in cameo form. But I'll go ahead and mention it now because I did bring it up in the recap and thoughts video for White Hare, but Stella does return. Stella has 2 more appearances in season 3. She does appear in some stories from the comic issues, and I believe Stella also appears in a chapter book. I'll have to look more into that, but I believe she does appear in a chapter book too. But yes, Stella does return after this segment, and I think it's safe to say that Stella will return in season 4 and season 5. Yes, I think it's safe to say that Stella has become a recurring role character for the Loud House, so we haven't seen the last of Stella. And I did bring this up in the recap and thoughts video for White Hare, but some fans had noticed that Stella seems to share certain things in common with Ronnie Ann, while also having notable differences. So this has led to some fans thinking that Stella was created to be a foil to Ronnie Ann, and I do think those fans have a point. Yes, I did bring up how White Hare and Heavy Metal sort of were similar to each other in the sense that Ronnie Ann and Stella both debuted in a similar way. They both had a technical debut where they weren't fully shown on screen. Like I said with Stella, we only saw the top of her head in White Hare, while in Ronnie Ann's case, she was off screen completely during Heavy Metal. And then the sequel episode, Save the Date in Ronnie Ann's case, and Be Stella My Heart in Stella's case, were the segments where they fully appeared on screen. So that was their formal debut. And I did bring this up for White Hare and Heavy Metal. Heavy Metal and White Hare were both the A segment for the second episode of their respective season. And funny enough, Be Stella My Heart and Save the Date are the B segments. Yes, they're the B segment for the 15th episode of their respective seasons. And funny enough, Ronnie Ann and Stella have the same number of appearances in their debut season. Ronnie Ann had 4 appearances in season 1, and Stella has 4 appearances in season 3. And a third appearance for both of them also parallel with each other in the sense that Ronnie Ann's 4th appearance in season 1 and Stella's 3rd appearance in season 3 happened to be the A segment for the 22nd episode of their debut season. And yeah, so it's just one appearance that doesn't line up in letter or number for episode or segment. Yes, so this could vary. The way the letters segments and the episode numbers line up could very well just be coincidence, but it's a pretty amusing coincidence all the same. But besides that detail, their fans had noticed some other similarities and differences with Ronnie and Stella. They're both the female members of Lincoln's inner circle, but a difference is Ronnie Ann seems to be more of an outsider to the inner circle, while Stella isn't really an outsider to the inner circle. By that I mean, while Ronnie Ann has interacted with Clyde and the Redheaded Trio, I only recall 2 occasions where she interacted with them off the top of my head. But yes, she barely interacts with Clyde and the Redheaded Trio. She really is more so Lincoln's friend, and she's closer to Lincoln. Stella, on the other hand, seems to be equally close with Lincoln, Clyde, and the Redheaded Trio. So that's another notable difference. There are some other differences, but to continue the similarities and differences for the idea of them being foils to each other, we'll talk about that a little later. First, I want to talk a little bit more about some other parts about this segment. Now, while this segment was a big change in status quo, this segment does seem to be very debated among some fans, or some fans have very strong opinions that differ. Some fans like this segment, some fans weren't too big on this segment, and part of that has to do with how they feel the segment implemented the lesson of this segment. From what I can tell, based off of my reference pools, fans do agree that the lesson of this segment was a valid lesson and a good lesson. It's just sentiments about how it was executed, how it was implemented, is where the disagreement happens. And some fans disagree with other fans' sentiments relating to how the lesson was approached, or some more general ideas, or more meta details. But I'll go more into that. So the lesson for this segment, or at least the main lesson for this segment, was it's possible for people of the opposite gender to be friends with each other in a platonic sense. And that is a good lesson. That's a perfectly valid lesson. The problem, though, or the debate, yes. The problem or the debate, yes. The debate is how some fans feel if it was problematic the way it was executed, or if some fans thought it was executed well. Now, some fans did like this segment because they did like the lesson being used. I remember some fans saying that they really liked this segment because they liked how we got to see males and females being friends in a platonic sense. But the point where some fans would disagree is how some fans were saying something along the lines about thinking that it's rare to see platonic bonds between males and females in works of fiction. But I can't say I agree with those sentiments. I've seen some fans, I recall seeing some individuals saying that they feel that romantic bonds overshadow family bonds or platonic bonds in works of fiction. But I can't say I agree with those sentiments. When I was a kid, and I was watching some shows or reading books, I never really felt like that there was a shortage of platonic bonds or family bonds, or I never got this impression that romantic bonds were treated being better or treated being more important than those other two bonds. I never really understood why some fans had those sentiments, and maybe it just boils down to reference pools. Maybe it's just that the reference pools I had didn't lead me to thinking that was the case for works of fiction. Because yes, for the works of fiction I've read and watched, I feel like there were works of fiction that did have plenty of examples of family bonds being the main focus, and ones where platonic bonds were a main focus too. And actually, continuing along with why I don't understand where those sentiments come from, part of that is because of how some staff and crew members for various shows have actually mentioned how they really didn't want to focus on romantic bonds in their shows. They wanted to focus on family. Like off the top of my head, the DuckTales reboot and Gravity Falls, I remember some staff and crew members saying that family was the big theme or the big focus of bonds in those shows, and that's perfectly cool. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I don't understand where some fans get this idea that non-romantic bonds seem to be overshadowed by romantic bonds, when staff and crew members say they're actually focusing on bonds besides romantic bonds. And I guess if you, so I guess you could say I never really felt like there was a shortage of platonic bonds or family bonds when compared to romantic bonds. I feel like there are different works of fiction that focus on one over the other, maybe, but I never felt like one was considered more important or better than the other. And I actually do remember seeing some shows that I feel managed to strike a balance with all three. I felt there were some shows where I felt they acknowledged that platonic bonds, family bonds, and romantic bonds were all important in their own way. And I feel like certain bonds weren't overshadowing the others. To give some examples, I feel Hey Arnold, Codenamed Kids Next Door, and the Young Justice TV series were shows that I feel managed to strike a balance between romantic bonds, platonic bonds, and family bonds. So once again, that continues to highlight why I can't say that highlights why I don't understand why some fans act like it's very rare to see platonic bonds be focused quite a bit. I feel like that there were works of fiction that did do so. But in the end, I guess this just goes to show that everyone's going to have different reference pools. Now, yes, continuing, another thing I've seen about why some people like this segment, where I've seen some fans say something along the lines of maybe this will teach certain fans not to pair up characters all the time. And I guess you could say the part I disagree with those choice of words, maybe their intent wasn't meant to be what the or yes, it's the choice of words do give me a certain impression. Maybe that wasn't the intention, but the impression I get is it feels like they're making a generalization about fans that do like to pair characters up, or fans that think certain characters would make a cute couple. Now, yes, there are extremist fans out there. There are some fans that are extremists that get very fixated on pairing up certain characters, and can get very antagonistic towards other fans that don't agree with them. But the truth of the matter is every faction of every fandom is going to have its extremists. If it's not about pairing up characters, it could be about something else. Like some fans might be fans of certain characters, but are unwilling to acknowledge their faults or their vices. While some fans might dislike certain characters, and fair enough if you don't, but some go the opposite, or some fans go to the extreme of acting like that these characters have no virtues, or they have no good qualities to them. And again, fair enough if you're a fan of a certain character, or if you're not a fan of a certain character, but there is a point where it's going too far. And there's other cases where some fans just point out some errors or inconsistencies, which is perfectly fine, but some go so far that they fixate on it and refuse to look at anything else. They just zero in on some mistakes or inconsistencies and won't ever stop fixating on it. And again, I hope you can tell the difference between the more reasonable approach versus the more extreme approach. But bottom line is every group has its share of extremists. So it doesn't seem very fair to single out one group for their extremists when other groups have their share of extremists too. And it's not right to make sweeping generalizations about an entire group just because of the actions of extremists. Extremists are pretty much the vocal minority. They're loud, they're obnoxious, but they don't make up the entirety of the group. From my experiences, the majority of the fans that do like to pair up characters just consider it to be harmless fun. If you don't agree with certain pairings, or if pairing characters up isn't your thing, fair enough. It's just that they just think it's harmless fun. And my stance on the whole thing is, if they're not attacking anyone, if they're not antagonizing anyone about it, then just let them have their fun. Don't be a stick in the mud. Don't rain on their parade. Just let them have their fun if they're not hurting anyone about it. And it's okay if some fans can be bummed out if certain pairings didn't happen. Fair enough. Some fans go too far, but other fans, it's just, oh, that's a shame. I thought they would have made a cute couple, and that's okay. And there were some fans that were disappointed that Stellakin, the pairing between Lincoln and Stella, didn't end up happening in this segment. And there were also fans for the pairing between Clyde and Stella, or Stella and Liam, Zach and Stella, or Stella and Rusty. I'm not sure what the names for those pairings are, but there were some fans that were disappointed about that, and for the most part, they were just reasonable fans that were a little sad that it didn't happen, and that's understandable. I do think that that some fans were. I can understand why some fans would be a little sad about that, and it probably doesn't help that White Hare did tease or hint at the possibility of Stellakin, so I can definitely understand why some fans were also bummed out about it, because an earlier segment did hint at the possibility that maybe Stella and Lincoln might become a couple in the future. So I can understand why some fans would be disappointed about that. But like I said, fair enough if some fans aren't big on pairing up other characters, but don't go trying to make fans that do like to pair up characters feel bad just because of what some extremists have done. So that's why some fans have did like this segment, and how some fans reacted to how other fans might have reacted, I guess you could say. But for the point where some fans didn't like this segment, it had to do with fans thinking that the lesson wasn't executed well, because from what I've seen, fans do agree that the lesson that males and females can be friends in a platonic sense is a valid lesson. It's a good lesson. It was just that fans felt that it wasn't executed as well as it could have been in this segment. And that's a part I agree with. The way I feel about this segment and its lesson actually reminds me of my sentiments for the season 1 segment, Lincoln Loud Girl Guru, where I think Girl Guru, yes, I thought Lincoln Loud Girl Guru had a good lesson. It was just how it was implemented or how it was executed fell flat. That's what fell flat for me. So just to quickly give a refresher, for Lincoln Loud Girl Guru, the lesson was not everyone of the same group is going to act the same way. And that's a perfectly good and valid lesson. But the problem I felt was how I felt how it was executed. I felt the problem was how it was executed in that segment. I felt that it was at best unnecessary, at worst forced, to teach that lesson to the boy who has 10 sisters with distinct personalities. And I especially felt the lesson fell flat because it glossed over, if not outright ignored, the equally valid lesson that it's possible for people to still have overlapping interests even if they aren't exactly the same. The Loud Sisters are a great example of this. The Loud Sisters all have distinct personalities, but they still also have some overlapping interests. So that's why I felt the idea of Lincoln giving advice based off of his experiences with his sisters was actually a solid idea. Having 10 sisters with distinct personalities gave me the impression that Lincoln just had a bigger reference pool to go off of. I felt the problem was more how Lincoln executed giving the advice. It felt like the segment just had Lincoln hold the idiot ball to justify the plan falling apart. Now, for the case of how this relates to Be Stella My Heart. Like I said, the lesson about males and females being friends in a platonic sense is a good and valid lesson. I just felt that it was at best unnecessary, at worst forced to teach that lesson to a group of boys that were already shown to be friends with females in a platonic sense. Girl Jordan is probably the most notable female character that Lincoln, Clyde, and the Redheaded Trio are friends with in a platonic sense. The earlier season 3 segments, Teachers Union and Past Your Bedtime, did show that Girl Jordan was on very friendly terms with Lincoln, Clyde, and the Redheaded Trio, and it was in a platonic sense. Girl Jordan had joined in, or yes, you could say Girl Jordan helped to inspire the plan yes, Girl Jordan was present for the, you could say, the meeting that led to inspiration for the plan to arrange it so that Coach Bukowski and Agnes Johnson became a couple for the sake of the gym class. She was present for that meeting, you could say. And in Past Your Bedtime, Girl Jordan did invite Lincoln, Clyde, and the Redheaded Trio to her pool party. And when they said they couldn't make it, she did say the offer was still on the table if they changed their mind or if their schedule freed up. So, yeah, Girl Jordan was the most notable example of a female character who was friends with Lincoln, Clyde, and the Redheaded Trio in a platonic sense. And Girl Jordan wasn't the only example either. Another good example would be Renee from Back Out There. In Back Out There, Renee was revealed to be a friend of Zach. Renee was revealed to be one of Zach's friends. And from what we saw, Renee and Zach being friends was shown to be in a platonic sense. Zach was actually trying to, Zach suggested that maybe Renee and Lincoln could become a couple, actually. So, yeah, Zach and Renee were shown to be friends in a platonic sense. And in Clyde's case, now, yes, Clyde is more so Lincoln's friend, and he does have a crush on Lori. But even though he's more so Lincoln's friend, and if we don't count his crush on Lori, if we talk about the rest of the Loud Sisters, Clyde is shown to be friends with the rest of the Loud Sisters in a platonic sense, even if he's more so Lincoln's friend. And Lenny in particular highlights how Clyde is friends. Or yes, Lenny is a good example of Clyde being friends with one of the Loud Sisters in a platonic sense. The Season 2 segment, Change of Heart, and the earlier Season 3 segment, Crimes of Fashion, were notable examples of Clyde and Lenny being friends in a platonic sense. And so, yeah, that's essentially why, that's the point where some fans do agree that they thought that the lesson was poorly executed because it felt unnecessary or forced to teach that lesson to a group of boys that already demonstrated that lesson. And that actually led to some fans, that led to why some fans didn't have a good impression of Stella in this segment. Yes, the fact that Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio were shown to be friends with females in a platonic sense is why some fans were really frustrated when Stella said that she thinks Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio couldn't handle being friends with a girl. Some fans thought that Stella was rather arrogant to say that. Now, some fans argued that Stella is still fairly new to Royalwood, so maybe she just didn't see Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio interacting with other females in a platonic sense. But other fans argued back that just illustrates that Stella jumped to conclusions without having the full context, just like how Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio jumped to conclusions about Stella's intention. And this actually leads into probably the biggest debate about the segment, at least from my experiences. Now, fans do agree, from what I've seen, fans do agree that it was wrong for Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio to blame Stella for them fighting amongst each other, and they do agree it was wrong for Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio to jump to conclusions about Stella's intention. But the debate comes from some fans that feel that the whole misunderstanding, the big misunderstanding of the segment, some fans think the blame falls solely on the boys, while other fans have argued that Stella shares some of the blame because she wasn't more forthcoming about her intentions. Now, some fans had argued against that. Some fans had argued, or I've seen some fans argue against saying that argue against the fans that say Stella should have been more forthcoming about her intentions by saying it's not someone's job to tell others what they're thinking or feeling. While other fans have argued back, it's not a matter of being someone's job or not, it's a matter of keeping the lines of communication clear and explicit. And yes, and part of that is because some fans have pointed out that while it was wrong for Lincoln and Clyde and the redheaded trio, while it was wrong for them to jump to conclusions, it has been brought up that, throughout the course of the segment, it was shown that Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio were confused about Stella's intentions. And I would have to say that, yes, it's understandable why they were confused about Stella's intentions, even if it was wrong for them to jump to conclusions. It's a case of understanding someone's actions not being the same as agreeing with someone's actions. And yeah, I would have to agree with some fans that it's easy to see why Stella's intentions came off being very vague. Stella's intentions did seem very vague, and this actually reminds me of something that happened in real life, to bring up a real life experience of my own. There was a couple that I and several other people I know had met, there was a point where some people I know and myself had met with a couple, but the way the couple had interacted, it was very vague. Like, it was vague enough where you could easily interpret their interactions to be platonic or romantic. It was that vague. It was very hard to determine what exactly was going on. Now, I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I know some people inquired me about what I thought, and all I could say was, it's vague enough where you could interpret it either way, but I don't know what it is. I'm not going to jump to conclusions, but that didn't stop some other people from coming to their own conclusions about whether it was platonic or romantic. There were some mixed answers for anyone who was curious. But Yes, after that experience and seeing how things played out in this segment, yeah, I can understand why Link and Clyde and the Red-Headed Trio were confused about Stella's intention. It was still wrong for them to jump to conclusions, don't misunderstand me, but at the same time, I do see where some fans are coming from when saying Stella probably could have been more clear or explicit about her intentions. Now, in the segment, Zach actually did question why Stella didn't say so in the first place. Why didn't she just say she wanted to be friends with them in a platonic sense in the first place? And Stella's justification was the awkward silence that happened when she tried to talk to them collectively. Now, some fans, though, felt that that reason came off being flimsy or weak because Stella came up with a solution to get around the awkward silence by interacting with each of the boys one-on-one to get to know them better. So some fans had brought up that Stella could have brought up her intentions during those one-on-one interactions. Like, for example, let's say when Stella was interacting with Lincoln, she could have said something like, say, could you fill me in on some of the interests of Clyde, Liam, Zach, and Rusty? I was actually hoping to be friends with all of you, but because of that awkward silence that happened when I tried to talk to you all at the same time, I thought it might be better to get to know each of you one-on-one. So if you could give me any advice about your friend's interests, then maybe that could help avoid that awkward silence so we can all be friends. And I think, yeah, that could have been a good chance to bring that up. But yeah, that's been a pretty big debate among fans. I guess you could say some fans think of Stella being an unwilling instigator of doom. She didn't mean any ill will. She wasn't trying to deceive anyone. She wasn't trying to play mind games. It was just that her intentions were vague enough where it was hard to know what exactly her intentions were. That's what some fans are saying, but some fans don't agree, and like I said, that can get very intense. So, yeah, I guess if you want my thoughts on it, I do think some fans have a point that it probably would have been a good idea for Stella to be more explicit about her intentions. And I think that also would have been a good chance to show another lesson, the lesson about how poor communication causes problems for everyone, because communication is a two-way street. Yes, you shouldn't jump to conclusions when you don't have the full context about something, but at the same time, you should be very clear and very explicit about your intentions. You should spell it out word for word, letter for letter. It's a good idea to be very clear and very explicit. Now, sure, there are some cases where you might want to be a little... Now, yeah, there's a time and place where you might want to be on the vague side, like if you're trying to throw a surprise party for someone, but in cases about becoming friends with someone, it probably is it's a good idea to be very clear about it. Now, again, it's perfectly okay if you're not looking for a romantic bond. It's okay if you just want to be friends with someone in a platonic sense. It's just a very good idea to be very clear and very explicit, because misunderstandings have a way of causing problems that weren't intended to begin with. So that's what I feel. I think some fans, that's why I guess you could say I do think that some fans have a point. I guess you could say I think some fans have a point that the segment felt a little too one-sided. The segment felt like it was putting all the blame on Link and Clyde and the Red-Headed Trio for jumping to conclusions, but the segment kind of glossed over, if not outright ignored, the fact that Stella could have been a little more clear about her intentions. So I can see where some fans are coming from when they suggest that maybe they're saying that they would have liked it if they could have kept Link and Clyde and the Red-Headed Trio apologizing to Stella, but they could have also included a scene where Stella acknowledged that maybe she could have been more clear about her intentions. I think, yeah, I would have to say I think fans have a point that the boys and Stella all dropped the ball, which caused a big misunderstanding. So I can see where some fans are coming from, thinking that it felt a little too one-sided to just acknowledge the boys dropping the ball, but not really acknowledging when Stella dropped the ball. So I can see where some fans are coming from, especially because that would have been a great chance to acknowledge the lesson about how it's a good idea to keep the lines of communication open. And I think part of that also is that some fans are worried that Stella might seem a little too perfect of a character. Yes, for the most part, I've seen some fans really do like Stella, but I have seen some fans that weren't the biggest fans of Stella, and part of that was they thought the segment portrayed Stella being too perfect, and I can understand those concerns. For what do I think of Stella? I think I don't have a problem with Stella. I think she's a good character. I think there is potential for Stella's character, but I do understand fans' concerns about if the show might portray Stella being too perfect or not acknowledging some flaws for Stella. And this actually goes into something about the similarities and differences between Ronnie Ann and Stella. Yes, for Ronnie Ann, yes. In Ronnie Ann's case, Ronnie Ann was shown to be someone who wore a figurative rough mask to hide her gentler side. Ronnie Ann tends to put up a tough facade when she actually does have a gentler side that she tends to keep hidden from others. In Stella's case, some fans do note that Stella is more outwardly friendly when compared to Ronnie Ann. And yeah, Stella's comment about, some fans though had different interpretations about Stella's comment about the boys not being able to handle being friends with a girl. Some fans took that to just be an example of beware the nice ones, but other fans had suggested it might be a clue that Stella has a secret dark side to her. Now that's not to say those fans aren't saying that Stella is secretly a bad person or anything like that, but more like the opposite of Ronnie Ann. Ronnie Ann's more likely to hide her virtues Ronnie Ann's more likely to hide her virtues. So some fans had suggested maybe Stella's the opposite. Maybe Stella's more likely to hide her vices in comparison. And if nothing else, I think that would add some depth to Stella's character. I think that would add depth to Stella's character. I think that would be a way to highlight, that could help to highlight the dynamic between Ronnie Ann and Stella being foils. And this actually brings, and I think some fans were also inspired by, or at least I was reminded of a Hey Arnold character actually, and when I heard this, and maybe some fans were thinking the same thing, but yes, I remember I brought up before in the past that some fans, myself included, initially thought that maybe Christina could be the Lila Sawyer to Ronnie Ann's Helga Pataki, but considering what's happened with Christina's character by this point, she only had like some cameos in season 2, and I don't think she's showed up in season 3 so far anyway. I'll have to refresh my memory if she gets a cameo in season 3's later entries or not, but some fans, it probably would be more accurate to say that Christina's probably more the Ruth McDougal to Ronnie Ann's Helga Pataki. It seems like actually Stella seems to be the Lila Sawyer to Ronnie Ann's Helga Pataki. And looking at it, yeah, there are some similarities between Stella and Lila Sawyer. Lila Sawyer and Stella were new students that arrived in a later season of their respective shows. And Lincoln and Arnold do have a crush on or had a crush on the characters. Now, there were some differences. Lila actually had a crush on Arnold first. Arnold didn't have a crush on Lila, but then eventually it reversed, where Lila didn't have a crush on Arnold, but Arnold had a crush on Lila. While here, yeah, White Hare indicated that, White Hare hinted, if not hinted or implied, if not outright indicated, that Lincoln had a crush on Stella, but for now, at least, Stella isn't looking for any romantic bonds. So yeah, there are differences, but I do see the similarities. So I can understand where some fans get the idea that Stella might have a secret dark side to contrast with Ronnie Ann having a secret gentler side. And it would be interesting. I do think that would add some depth to Stella's character. And I think it would be interesting to see Ronnie Ann and Stella actually meet each other and interact with each other because of how they seem to be foils to each other. I'm certainly hoping that we get to see Ronnie Ann and Stella meet each other someday in the future. Oh, yes, and while I'm on the topic about Stella not really looking for a romantic bond with Lincoln or Clyde, or the redhead trio for that matter, that led to another debate too. Some fans were thinking it could be possible that maybe some fans have argued over whether or not it would be possible for Stellakin, or any of those other pairings for that matter, to happen in the future. Some fans argue that it won't happen because they say that would defeat the whole lesson of this segment, but other fans have argued that there's the equally valid lesson that people can have a change of heart or a change of feelings over the course of time. Now, of course, it doesn't always happen, but it's not impossible either. So some fans brought up it could be possible that maybe in the future Stella might have a change of heart or a change of feelings and might be interested in dating in the future. I mean, they are just 11 right now. It's possible that feelings can change in upcoming years. And some fans have pointed out that even if Stella were to become a couple with either Lincoln, Clyde, or the redheaded trio, the lesson about males and females still being friends in a platonic sense wouldn't be undermined because, like it was mentioned earlier, Lincoln, Clyde, and the redheaded trio have been shown to be friends with females in a platonic sense. So yeah, that's been a debate too. But yeah, I think we have to be patient. I know season 5 is supposed to change the status quo in very significant ways. So maybe we'll see some changes like that. I'm not entirely sure. We're just going to have to play the waiting game. And who knows if we ever will get an explicit answer of what happens in these characters' futures, if certain characters do end up becoming couples with other characters. Who knows if the show ever will give us a distant epilogue showing us that sort of thing. Who knows? But yeah, I wouldn't rule out the possibility. I'm not saying it will happen. It's just like I wouldn't rule out the possibility. But yes, if you're a fan of Stellakin or maybe a fan of any of those other pairings, I wouldn't worry just yet. We'll have to see what happens in the show's future. So otherwise, I think that might be about it. This was definitely on the longer side, but I felt that this segment definitely had a lot that was worth talking about. Yes, I thought there was a lot to talk about with this segment, being a big change in status quo, but also being a very debated entry in the in season 3, if not the entire series. So to summarize, I don't think that this is an outright bad segment, but I do think that this segment, I think this segment had good points to it, but I do feel that this segment was weakened by some flaws. Like I said, the lesson of this segment was a great and valid lesson. It was just that it felt forced or unnecessary to teach that lesson to a group of characters that already were demonstrating that lesson. It just made it feel like those characters were just holding the idiot ball to justify the conflict. And I do think some fans have a point that the segment felt a little too one-sided, only acknowledging the boys dropping the ball, but not really, but kind of glossing over how Stella dropped the ball by not being too clear about her intentions. And like I said, that was a missed opportunity because the lesson about good communication is a very valid lesson. Because yes, don't jump to conclusions is a great lesson, but it's also a great lesson to be very clear and explicit about your intentions. And like I said, I think Stella herself is a good character. I do think that there's potential with Stella's character, particularly highlighting her and Ronnie Ann being foils to each other. And I definitely would be on board with seeing Ronnie Ann and Stella meet each other in the future. And so yes, otherwise I would say that's about it for this segment. It had good points. It did change the status quo in a significant way, but it did feel like it felt like that there were some notable weaknesses because of notable flaws. But there we go for now. So as of this video, we've now discussed the B segment for episode 67 of The Loud House on this channel. Take care, and until next time.